Liora had always trusted Darien, the man who had been a father figure to her for as long as she could remember. But everything shattered the moment she discovered the truth. The man who claimed to love her had gotten her mother pregnant. The web of lies he'd spun for years was unraveling fast, and Liora found herself in a battle not just for her family, but for her very sense of self. How could the person she had trusted most betray her in the most unimaginable way? Liora Cole was a young woman full of promise, just 22 years old, when she met Darien Voss. She had grown up in a quiet neighborhood with her mother, Aven, who had raised her single-handedly after her father's disappearance when Liora was only 3. Aven was a strong woman, one who worked long hours at a local marketing firm to keep their modest home. But her love for Liora was boundless. They had been a team, just the two of them against the world. That was until Darien entered their lives. Liora had met him at a local cafe one chilly autumn morning. He was new to town, she later learned, having recently opened a landscaping business. Darien was tall, with dark brown hair and a quiet demeanor that exuded confidence without arrogance. He was charming, with a warm smile that made Liora feel at ease instantly. He complimented her, asked about her day, and then, over the next few weeks, he seemed to always appear just when she needed someone to talk to. She began to feel a connection, a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. Soon, Darien was visiting their home regularly. At first, it was harmless, just casual conversations between him and Liora in the living room while Aven went about her work. But it didn't take long for Darien to charm his way into Aven's heart as well. He began doing small favors around the house, fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, mowing the lawn, and even painting the fence. Aven, who had always been cautious with men after the pain of a failed marriage, found herself drawn to Darien's attention. He wasn't like the men she had known in the past. He was respectful, kind, and seemingly sincere. Liora was thrilled to see her mother smiling again. She hadn't seen Aven this happy in years. She would catch them talking late into the evening over glasses of wine, laughing together like old friends. Darien was a part of their lives now, and for a while, it seemed like a dream come true. It wasn't long before Darien began to show his affections more directly toward Liora. He would take her out to dinner at local spots, shower her with little gifts, and write her thoughtful notes that made her feel special. Liora was swept off her feet. He made promises about their future together, about travel and adventure, and about how they would one day build a life full of love and happiness. Liora believed every word he said. He was everything she had ever wanted, a man who seemed to care deeply for her and who made her feel cherished. But as the weeks went by, Liora began to notice subtle changes in Darien's behavior. He would get distant at times, his eyes wandering, almost as if he was preoccupied with something else. He became secretive about his past, avoiding direct questions about where he was from or why he had moved to town. His answers were always vague, designed to brush off any suspicion. He claimed to have a rough upbringing, but he never went into specifics. Liora thought little of it at the time. She assumed he was just a private person. However, Aven began to act differently as well. She seemed more energetic, more vibrant than usual. At first, Liora attributed it to the new relationship with Darien, but as the weeks passed, she began to notice other changes, small, unsettling things that gnawed at her. Her mother had always been a creature of habit, but now she was going out more frequently, without telling Liora where she was going. Sometimes, she would come home late, looking flustered, with an expression Liora had never seen on her face before, a mix of contentment and confusion. One evening, Liora came home from work early and overheard her mother talking on the phone. The conversation was private, but Liora's ears caught enough to know something wasn't right. Her mother sounded giddy, almost flirtatious, but the words Liora overheard left a pit in her stomach. Aven mentioned Darien's name, and Liora heard her say, "I can't wait for tonight." Liora had never felt a pang of jealousy toward her mother before, but in that moment, something in her shifted. A sinking feeling washed over her, but she couldn't quite place it. Was something happening between her mother and Darien? She tried. to brush it off, but the thought lingered in the back of her mind, a persistent echo that made her uneasy. Over the following days, Leora's suspicions grew. Darien's visits became more frequent, and he seemed to spend more time with Aven than with her. He was always there, always around when Liora came home from school or work. The easy, comfortable relationship between the three of them began to feel strained. Liora would walk into a room to find Darien and Aven talking quietly, exchanging glances that seemed too intimate, too knowing. Her mother's laughter, once light and carefree, now had an edge to it, a hidden layer of meaning Liora couldn't quite understand. It was in the middle of one of those quiet, uncomfortable moments that Liora began to doubt the sincerity of Darien's feelings for her. She couldn't help but wonder if his affection for her was genuine or just a facade. Maybe his feelings for her were never real. Maybe he was simply using her to get closer to her mother. But the thought was too painful to entertain, so Liora pushed it aside and tried to focus on the future she had dreamed of with Darien. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Something darker was happening right under her nose, and as much as she tried to ignore it, she couldn't shake the sense that she was being deceived. The truth, she feared, was far more complicated than she was willing to admit. And it was only a matter of time before the facade would crumble and everything would be exposed. As the days passed, the discomfort in Leora's heart grew. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something felt off between Darien and her mother, Aven. Liora would come home from school or work to find Darien lounging on the couch with Aven, both of them laughing about something only they seemed to understand. Sometimes their laughter sounded too genuine, too intimate, like they shared a connection that went beyond friendship. It was subtle at first, but it was there. The way Aven looked at Darien with a softness that Liora hadn't seen before. Liora had always been close to her mother, but now there was a distance between them that she couldn't explain. Aven was becoming more withdrawn, more preoccupied with Darien than with Liora. She started going out more often for errands or meetings that she didn't elaborate on. At first, Liora didn't think much of it. Aven worked long hours, and she'd earned the right to enjoy some time for herself. But when Aven started coming home late, her eyes a little too bright and her steps a little too hurried, Leora's unease grew. Then, the faint signs of Aven's changing. Behavior became harder to ignore. One afternoon, Liora returned home earlier than usual, only to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone with a strange, almost giddy expression. She was texting someone. Liora didn't recognize the number, but her mother's fingers hovered over the screen, as if she were waiting for a response, almost as if she were holding her breath. The moment Liora entered the room, Aven quickly put her phone down, and her face quickly transformed into something more neutral, almost too forced. "Everything okay, Mom?" Liora asked, trying to hide the concern in her voice. Aven gave her a tight smile. "Just tired, honey. Nothing to worry about. How was your day?" But Liora couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind closed doors, something that her mother wasn't telling her. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to entertain the idea that Darien, the man she had trusted, could be hiding something from her. But the evidence was mounting, and she couldn't look away from the unsettling truths that were quietly emerging. The breaking point came one night when Liora couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of her mother's laughter drifting in from the living room. The clock on her nightstand read past midnight. She had told herself that she wouldn't worry, that everything was fine, but the growing suspicion gnawed at her until she couldn't ignore it any longer. She quietly got out of bed, trying not to make a sound as she crept down the hallway toward the living room. The light from the kitchen illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the floor. She peeked around the corner and froze. There, sitting on the couch, were Darien and Aven. They were talking in hushed tones, but the closeness between them was undeniable. Aven's body was angled toward Darien, her head tilted as she listened intently. Darien's hand rested on the arm of the couch, inches away from Aven's. But it wasn't just his hand that bothered Liora. It was the look on his face. The way he gazed at Aven with an intensity that seemed too personal, too familiar. Then, Darien leaned in slightly, and Liora saw something that made her stomach twist. Aven didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, her eyes soft with affection. The look they exchanged wasn't one of friends or even a new couple. It was the kind of look two people give each other when they share something deeper, something more dangerous. Liora's heart sank, and the weight of the moment hit her like a punch to the chest. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She wanted to run, to escape from the suffocating feeling of betrayal that was flooding her chest, but her body froze. She couldn't tear her eyes away. Suddenly, Aven's voice broke the silence. "We can't keep doing this, Darien," she whispered, but her words were laced with a hesitation that made Liora's blood run cold. "I'm scared of what will happen if Liora finds out." Liora's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, her thoughts swirling in confusion. "What's going on?" she whispered to herself, barely able to believe what she was hearing. Darien's voice, low and smooth, replied, "We're not doing anything wrong. Liora doesn't have to know. This is just between us, Aven. She'll never have to know." Liora stepped back into the hallway, her heart pounding in her ears. She felt like she was going to be sick. Her own mother, the woman who had always protected her, had been hiding something from her, something she had no right to keep secret. And Darien, the man Liora had trusted, the man who had told her he loved her, he had been lying all along. The next few days passed in a blur. Liora barely spoke to either of them. She spent as much time away from home as possible, finding excuses to stay with friends or linger at work. Every time she came home, the unease between her and her mother was palpable. Aven seemed to sense Liora's coldness, but she didn't ask about it. Instead, she kept her distance, her eyes avoiding Liora's whenever they crossed paths. It was as if the truth was an unspoken barrier between them now, a divide that neither could cross. Liora knew she had to confront her mother. She couldn't live in this nightmare any longer. But the more she thought about it, the more conflicted she became. How could she confront her mother, the woman who had raised her, who had been her rock, knowing that the betrayal had come from both her mother and Darien? Liora's emotions were a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and confusion, and she didn't know how to make sense of any of it. It wasn't until Aven's sudden illness that Liora was forced to confront the truth head-on. Aven fainted one evening, and the hospital tests revealed something that would change everything. Liora's world, already shaken to its core, was about to fall apart completely. Liora's world came crashing down on the night her mother collapsed. She had been expecting a quiet evening at home after a long day, but nothing could prepare her for the phone call she received from Aven's doctor. It was late when the phone rang, its shrill sound breaking the silence in the house. Liora had just returned from meeting a friend, her mind still consumed by the unsettling events of the past few days. She was half expecting the call to be about her mother's recent health issues, minor things that Aven had brushed off in the past, but this time, it was different. "Liora, it's Dr. Simmons," the voice on the other end of the line said, his tone serious. "Your mother has fainted, and we've found something concerning during her tests. We need to run a few more diagnostics to determine what's going on." Liora's heart raced. "What do you mean? Is she okay?" "We're not sure yet," Dr. Simmons replied. "I'd advise you to come down to the hospital. I'll have one of the nurses brief you when you arrive. We just need you here as soon as possible." Liora didn't waste another second. She grabbed her coat, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the buttons. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and worry. Her mother had never been seriously ill before. Sure, she had the occasional cold, but nothing this alarming. She rushed to the hospital, her mind racing with questions, but none of them made any sense. Why had Aven suddenly collapsed? What had the doctors found? And why had Aven been acting so strange lately? When Liora arrived at the hospital, she was met by a nurse who led her to a sterile room in the emergency department. The sterile smell,
Fantastic field they walked through this empty corridors. Her stomach was in the knots and her veins were clammy, but she tried to keep herself composed as
An IV drip hooked up to her arm. Aven's face looked pale, her lips slightly parted as if she were struggling to breathe. But there was a softness in her expression that was unfamiliar to Liora. Aven turned her head when she saw Liora, her eyes widening with relief. "Liora," she said weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "Mum, what happened?" Liora asked, her voice trembling. She took a seat by the bed and took her mother's hand, trying to steady her own nerves. "I don't know, sweetie," Aven replied, her voice strained. "I was feeling a little lightheaded all day, but I didn't think much of it. Then, I just passed out." She tried to sit up, but the nurse gently pressed her back down. "We need to run a few more tests," the nurse said, her tone professional, yet concerned. "We'll let you know as soon as we have more information. You can wait here with her." Liora nodded absently, still trying to process the sight before her. Her mother was always so strong, so in control. This sudden vulnerability was unsettling, like a piece of her security had been shattered. She stayed by Aven's side, offering comfort where she could, but her mind kept drifting back to the events from the past few days, the conversations she had overheard, the look in her mother's eyes when she had been with Darien. It felt like the walls were closing in on her, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something terrible was unfolding right before her eyes. Hours passed before Dr. Simmons returned to speak with Liora. His expression was unreadable as he entered the room, his clipboard in hand. "Liora," he began, his tone grave, "I have the results of your mother's tests. We've found something very concerning." Leora's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Is she going to be okay?" "We're not sure yet," Dr. Simmons replied. "Your mother is pregnant, Liora." The words hit Liora like a slap across the face. She blinked in disbelief, her mind racing to process what the doctor had just said. "Pregnant? What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking. Dr. Simmons paused for a moment, watching Leora's reaction. "Your mother is in the early stages of pregnancy, Liora. We've confirmed it through blood tests. It's very early, but we're certain. We'll need to run more tests to determine how far along she is." Liora felt like the room was spinning. She couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. Her mother, pregnant? It didn't make sense. Aven was in her late 40s, and she had never mentioned anything about this. Leora's mind immediately jumped to the only person who could be involved, Darien. But no, it couldn't be him. Her mother wouldn't. A wave of nausea hit her, and she turned away from the doctor, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they painted was too much to bear. Her mother's strange behavior, the closeness between Aven and Darien, the private conversations she had overheard. It all made sense now. The shock of the revelation was too overwhelming, and Liora could hardly breathe. "Are you sure about this?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're sure," Dr. Simmons said. "We'll need to do a more detailed ultrasound in the morning, but the blood tests confirm it. I understand this is a lot to process. Do you have any questions?" Liora didn't have any questions. She had only one thought running through her mind. Darien. The man she had trusted, the man who had professed his love for her. He had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And now, her mother was pregnant with his child. She felt a surge of anger and betrayal, followed by a deep sadness that threatened to crush her. How could this happen? How could Darien, the man she had believed in, betray her so completely? And how could her mother, the one person who had always been there for her, allow this to happen? Leora's world was falling apart, and she had no idea how to pick up the pieces. She needed answers, and she needed them now. But the truth she was about to uncover would be more painful than anything she could have ever imagined. Liora couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at her from the inside. The news about her mother's pregnancy had turned her world upside down, and no matter how many times she tried to rationalize it, she couldn't escape the sinking feeling in her gut. She paced her room that night, her mind spinning with questions and confusion. How had things gotten this far? She had trusted Darien, believed that he loved her, and had seen him as a father figure of sorts, and now he was the cause of the deepest wound Liora could imagine, betraying both her and her mother. The following morning, after a restless night spent tossing and turning, Liora couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had to confront her mother. She couldn't pretend everything was normal. She couldn't keep walking on eggshells, hoping the truth would never come out. Aven's actions, Darien's lies, and the pregnancy. It was all connected, and Liora had to know exactly how deep the deception ran. When she arrived at the hospital that morning, her stomach churned with anticipation. She tried to prepare herself for the conversation ahead, but there was no way to brace for the impact of what she would hear. As soon as she walked into Aven's room, her mother looked up, her face pale and tired. The exhaustion from the night before had settled deeper in her features, but her eyes softened as they met Liora's. "Liora," Aven said, her voice a little hoarse. "I'm glad you're here." Liora didn't return her smile. She couldn't, not when everything felt like a lie. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm, yet trembling. "About everything. About Darien. About the baby." Aven's expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly masked her discomfort with a nervous smile. "Sweetie, I know this must be difficult for you to understand, but—" "No, Mom," Liora interrupted, her words coming out harsher than she intended. "I don't need you to explain. I've seen the way you and Darien have been acting, the way you look at him." Liora's voice caught in her throat. The words felt like a weight she couldn't bear. "You're pregnant and it's his child, isn't it?" Aven's face went ashen, the blood draining from her cheeks. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. For a long moment, the room was still, the silence pressing heavily between them. Liora's heart hammered in her chest, her pulse racing with the need for answers. She couldn't let her mother hide from the truth anymore. I never meant for this to happen," Aven said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked away from Liora, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "It started so innocently. Darien and we were friends for years. You know that. I never expected anything to change." Liora felt a wave of disgust rise within her. "But it did change, didn't it? You and Darien. You've been together all this time, behind my back, and now you're carrying his child." Her words were like acid, cutting through the years of trust and love she had for her mother. Aven's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her daughter, her voice cracking. "Liora, I never wanted to hurt you. This wasn't part of the plan. Darien and we were just looking for comfort, for something to hold on to. We've both been through so much, and when we found each other, it felt like it was meant to be." Liora couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mother, the woman she had looked up to her whole life, was confessing to something that felt almost unforgivable. Her own mother, betraying her in the most intimate and painful way imaginable. "So what? You're just going to keep this a secret? You think I can just pretend nothing is happening?" Aven's tears started to fall, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I never wanted to lie to you. I was afraid. I didn't know how to tell you, and I didn't want to lose you." Liora took a step back, feeling her body tremble. "You already lost me, Mum," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "How could you do this to me? You've been hiding this from me. And Darien, how could he do this to us? To me? I never wanted this to happen," Aven said again, her voice frantic. "But it did. And now there's nothing I can do to take it back." I'm so sorry, Liora. The words felt hollow. Liora didn't want to hear apologies anymore. They didn't undo the damage that had already been done. Her whole life had been built on trust, and now it felt like that foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. She turned away from her mother, trying to gather her thoughts. Her mind was a swirling mess of rage, sadness, and confusion. She needed space. She needed time to think, to process what had just happened. And most of all, she needed to confront Darien, the man who had promised her love, who had been a part of her life for years. The man who had shattered everything in a single, cruel betrayal. As she walked out of her mother's hospital room, Liora's mind was set on one thing: finding Darien and getting the answers she so desperately needed. She couldn't let him continue to hide behind lies. She couldn't let him break her heart any more than he already had. Liora knew what she had to do. She had to take control of the situation, even if it meant facing the truth she wasn't ready to hear. Darien had a lot to answer for, and Liora was done waiting. She was going to confront him, and this time, there would be no hiding from the consequences of his actions. Liora spent the next few days in a fog, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, confusion, and disbelief. The reality of what had happened hit her harder than she had expected. She couldn't stop replaying the conversations with her mother over and over in her head, trying to make sense of the words, of the lies, of the heartbreak. But no matter how many times she thought about it, the picture didn't change. Her mother, Aven, the woman who had always been her rock, had made the most devastating choice she could imagine. And Darien, the man she thought loved her, who had been part of their family for years, had betrayed her in a way that seemed unforgivable. The shock of it all felt suffocating, and every minute that passed seemed to drag Liora deeper into a pit of uncertainty. She could no longer look at Darien the way she had before. He had been more than just her stepfather. He had been the person she confided in, the person who guided her through the toughest parts of her life. Now, all of that was tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. Liora had spent so much time avoiding, confronting Darien, afraid of what she might find, but she knew she could no longer run from it. It was time to face the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the remnants of what had once been a family. When Liora finally decided to confront Darien, she didn't know exactly what she was expecting, but she knew that she couldn't let him slip away without an explanation. She found herself standing in front of his apartment door, her hand frozen on the doorknob as her breath hitched in her chest. Every step of this confrontation had felt inevitable, but now that she was here, it felt as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. Her heart pounded, each beat a reminder of the betrayal she had suffered. She had thought she would be angry when the moment came, but now she just felt exhausted. Exhausted by the lies, the secrets, the years of trusting someone who had never truly been trustworthy. Liora knocked on the door with trembling hands, each knock echoing in the silence of the hallway. She didn't have a plan for what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She needed answers. She needed to hear him say it. Darien answered the door quickly, his face lighting up when he saw her, but the smile quickly faded when he registered the look on her face. His eyes narrowed with confusion, but there was something else there too: guilt, shame. He stepped aside, allowing Liora to enter his apartment, but she didn't move. She stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes never leaving his face. "What's going on, Liora? Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice full of false concern. It was the kind of tone he used when he was trying to manipulate the situation, to steer things in his favor. "No, Darien, nothing's okay," Liora replied, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "How could you do this? How could you do this to me? To my mother?"
Darien's face turned pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Please, you don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen this way.
The anger that had been simmering inside her coming to the surface. "You got my mother pregnant, Darien. How is that not supposed to happen? You've been lying to both of us for months, maybe longer. And for what? A quick fix, some comfort." He stepped closer, But Liora took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. Liora, I care about your mom. I care about you too. It was a mistake, a huge mistake, but it wasn't something I planned. We got too close. It just happened. Happened? Liora repeated, her voice dangerously low. That's all you have to say for yourself. You've known me for years. I trusted you. And my mother, she trusted you. She was there for you when you needed someone. And this is what you do. Darien's face softened slightly, a flicker of guilt flashing in his eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen, Liora. It's complicated. Your mother and I, we were both hurting. You don't know what it's like. No, Liora interrupted, her voice sharp. I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like to betray someone I love. To hurt someone who trusted me with everything. You should be ashamed of yourself, Darien. But instead you're standing here trying to make excuses for your actions. Darien looked down at his feet, avoiding her gaze. I know I screwed up. But please don't shut me out. I never wanted to hurt you. Liora shook her head. You don't get it, do you? You've already hurt me. You've hurt me in ways I can't even describe. But it's not just about me, it's about my mother too. You've broken her, Darien. And now you've broken me. You don't get to come in here and pretend like you didn't destroy everything. There was a long silence between them, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Darien stood still, his expression unreadable, while Liora stared at him, her chest heaving with the effort it took not to completely collapse under the pressure of what had happened. Finally, Darien spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I can't fix this. I know I've messed everything up. But I never meant to hurt you, Liora. I'm so sorry. Liora stared at him, the words not bringing any comfort, only more frustration. Sorry? You think that's enough? Sorry won't fix what you've done. Sorry won't take away the pain you've caused. You've ruined everything. Tears began to form in her eyes, but Liora fought them back. She wouldn't let him see her breakdown, not after everything. He had no right to her tears anymore. I'm done, Darien, she said quietly. You've already taken everything from me, and now I'm walking away. Don't ever contact me again. She turned to leave, her heart heavy with the finality of the moment. As she reached the door, she heard Darien's voice one last time, calling out her name. But Liora didn't turn around. She didn't need to hear anything more. The truth had been revealed, and it was enough. She had lost everything, but now it was time to move on. She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her, and for the first time in days, she felt a small sense of peace settle in her chest. She was done with the lies. She was done with the betrayal, and now she could finally begin to rebuild.